Welcome to a story that will challenge everything you think you know about love, class, and human connection. Today, we're diving into the extraordinary tale of Victoria Sterling, a powerful CEO who built walls around her heart so high that no man could climb them. But sometimes, the most unexpected person can find the hidden door we never knew existed. If you're ready for a journey that will make you question society's boundaries and believe in the transformative power of genuine human connection, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this incredible story unfolds. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, each drop creating rivulets that distorted the glittering lights of Manhattan below. Victoria Sterling stood motionless behind her mahogany desk, her silhouette sharp against the storm-darkened sky. At 34, she commanded Sterling Enterprises with an iron fist wrapped in Hermes silk, her every decision rippling through Wall Street like seismic waves. "Miss Sterling?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, barely audible above the thunder. "Mr. Davidson is here for the 7 o'clock appointment." Victoria's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Richard Davidson, Harvard MBA, family fortune dating back 3 generations. The kind of man her mother had been parading in front of her since she turned 25. He was punctual, she'd give him that. But punctuality wouldn't save him from what was coming. "Send him in." Sarah, the heavy oak doors swung open, and Davidson strutted in with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. His Armani suit was impeccable, his smile practiced, his handshake firm enough to impress but not so firm as to seem desperate. Victoria had seen it all before, dozens of times, with dozens of different faces wearing the same entitled expression. "Victoria," he said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk without invitation. "You look absolutely stunning tonight. That Valentino dress is perfect on you." She didn't smile, didn't offer him coffee or water. Instead, she studied him with the same clinical detachment she reserved for quarterly earnings reports. "You have 15 minutes, Richard. Use them wisely." His confidence wavered for just a moment before reassembling itself. "Straight to business. I like that about you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a seductive whisper. "Look, we both know why I'm here. Our families have been friends for decades. We move in the same circles, understand the same pressures, share the same ambitions." Victoria's fingers drummed once against her desk, a sound like a judge's gavel in the silence. "Is that your pitch, Richard? That we're suitable? Suitable?" He laughed, a sound like champagne bubbles bursting. "Victoria, we're perfect. Think about it. Sterling Davidson Holdings. We could merge more than just our companies. The power we'd wield together would be unprecedented." And there it was. The same proposal wrapped in different words that she'd heard from Marcus Rothschild last month, from James Worthington the month before, from an endless parade of men who saw her not as a woman, but as an acquisition target. They spoke of love in terms of market shares, of romance in quarterly projections. "You want to know what I think, Richard?" Victoria stood, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked to the window. The storm was intensifying, and somewhere far below, people were hurrying through the streets, their umbrellas useless against the wind. "I think you've confused me with a commodity to be traded." "Now wait just a minute. No." The word cut through the air like a blade. "You wait. Do you see that building across the street? The one with the blue lights on the 19th floor? I bought that last Tuesday. Not because I needed it, but because the seller reminded me of every man who sat in that chair and told me how perfect we'd be together." Richard's face was flushing now, his composure cracking. "You can't be serious. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? What we could build together?" Victoria turned to face him, and for the first time in years, she let her mask slip just enough to show the steel beneath. "I could buy and sell your family's entire fortune 3 times over, Richard. I built an empire while men like you were playing golf at country clubs and debating which yacht to take to the Hamptons. So tell me, what exactly would you be bringing to this partnership besides your surname and your ego?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his practiced charm evaporating under the heat of her stare. Finally he stood, his movements jerky and uncertain. "This is a mistake, Victoria. A woman like you need someone who understands your world. My world." Victoria's laugh was sharp, humorless. My world doesn't need understanding, Richard. It needs respect. And respect is something money can't buy, not even with your family's checkbook. As the door closed behind him with a soft click, Victoria returned to her window. The storm was reaching its peak now, and she could see people taking shelter wherever they could find it. In doorways, under awnings, huddled together against the wind and rain. For a moment, just a moment, she wondered what it would feel like to be one of them. To need shelter, to depend on the kindness of strangers, to have no walls between yourself and the world's chaos. But the moment passed, as such moments always did. Victoria Sterling was untouchable, unreachable, and that's exactly how she'd built her life to be. No man had ever seen past her fortune to whatever lay beneath, and she'd long ago stopped believing that anyone ever would. Outside, the storm raged on, and 42 floors below, in the shadows of the city's indifference, a young woman pulled a threadbare coat tighter around her shoulders and wondered if the rain would ever stop. The morning sun cut through the dissipating storm clouds like golden scissors, casting long shadows across Washington Square Park. Emma Rodriguez sat on her favorite bench, the one partially hidden behind the old oak tree where the park maintenance crew rarely bothered to check for overnight visitors. Her backpack, containing everything she owned, served as both pillow and protection, positioned carefully between her body and the bench's armrest. At 23, Emma had the kind of beauty that didn't announce itself with fanfare, but whispered instead, in the way morning light caught the amber flecks in her dark eyes, in the graceful curve of her hands as she folded her makeshift bedding, in the quiet dignity she maintained despite sleeping rough for the better part of 6 months. Morning. Sunshine. The voice belonged to Marcus, a grizzled veteran in his 50s who'd claimed the bench across the path as his territory. Despite his circumstances, he maintained a morning ritual of sharing whatever food he'd managed to gather the previous day. Got some decent coffee from the bodega on Sullivan. Owners got a soft spot for strays like us. Emma accepted the paper cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. The coffee was bitter, probably yesterday's leftovers. But it was hot and it was free. And those were the only criteria that mattered anymore. Thanks, Marcus. Any luck with that job lead yesterday? Nah, construction foreman took one look at this gray hair and decided I was past my prime. But hey, there's always today, right? His optimism was legendary among the park's unofficial residents. Marcus had been living rough for 3 years since his apartment building had been condemned, yet he approached each morning like it might be the one that changed everything. Emma nodded, though privately she wondered if her own optimism was beginning to fray at the edges. 6 months ago, she'd been a promising literature student at NYU, working 2 part-time jobs to pay for her education while sending money home to help her mother with medical bills. Then her mother's condition had worsened, requiring experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Emma had dropped out, used her savings, maxed out credit cards, sold everything she owned. It hadn't been enough. Her mother died anyway, and Emma found herself adrift in a city that consumed dreams as efficiently as it created them. I should probably get moving, she said, folding her thin blanket with practiced efficiency. Want to hit the library when it opens? Maybe work on some of those online applications. Hold up. Marcus was staring past her shoulder, his weathered face creased with curiosity. You see that? Emma turned to follow his gaze. A sleek black Mercedes had pulled up to the curb, its engine purring like a contented cat. The rear window was rolled down slightly, and she could make out a figure silhouetted against the tinted glass. For several long moments, the car simply sat there, as if whoever was inside was studying the park and its inhabitants with scientific interest. Rich folks sometimes come to gawk, Marcus muttered, like we're some kind of zoo exhibit. But there was something different about this observer. The car wasn't moving on after a few minutes of voyeuristic curiosity. Instead, the rear door opened and a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, everything about her screamed wealth. The cut of her charcoal gray suit, the way she moved with absolute certainty, the protective bubble of space that seemed to surround her as she walked. Victoria Sterling had intended to drive straight to her office that morning. She'd told her driver to take the usual route up Fifth Avenue, past the familiar landmarks of her ordered world. But something had made her ask him to detour through Washington Square Park. Perhaps the memory of watching the storm from her window the night before. Perhaps simple curiosity about how the other half weathered such tempests. She hadn't expected to stop. Hadn't expected to find herself studying the small ecosystem of humanity that had carved out survival in the park's shadows. Most of all, she hadn't expected to lock eyes with a young woman who was folding a blanket with the kind of careful precision Victoria recognized from her own morning routines. Their gazes met across perhaps 50 yards of park pathway, and for a moment that stretched like taffy, neither looked away. Victoria saw intelligence in those dark eyes, a spark that poverty hadn't managed to extinguish. Emma saw something she couldn't quite name, not pity, not curiosity, but a kind of recognition, as if the woman in the expensive suit was seeing something familiar in the park's morning tableau. "Victoria?" Her driver's voice broke the spell. "Everything all right, ma'am?" "Fine, James, just fine." But even as she said it, Victoria continued to stare at the young woman, who was now standing beside an older man, both of them watching her with the wary alertness of deer who'd spotted a predator. Without quite understanding why, Victoria found herself walking toward them. Her heels clicked against the park's paved pathways, each step carrying her further from her familiar world and closer to something she couldn't name. She moved with purpose, as she did everything, but beneath the surface confidence, her heart was beating with an irregular rhythm she hadn't felt since her first board meeting. Emma watched the approach with fascination tinged by caution. In her months on the street, she'd learned to read people quickly, to identify those who might help, those who might hurt, and those who might simply ignore her existence entirely. But this woman defied easy categorization. Her posture was commanding, her clothes expensive enough to feed Emma for a month, yet there was something in her eyes that suggested she understood what it meant to be alone in a crowded world. "Excuse me," Victoria said, when she was close enough to speak without raising her voice. Her words were directed at Emma, though she acknowledged Marcus with a polite nod. "I know this might sound strange, but are you all right?" The question hung in the morning air like an unexpected gift. Emma had been asked for spare change countless times, had been told to move along by security guards and police officers, had been lectured by social workers about available services and shelters. But no one had simply asked if she was all right. Emma started, then stopped. How did you answer such a question when you were homeless, jobless, and running on 3 hours of sleep and yesterday's coffee? How did you explain to someone who radiated wealth and success that all right was a luxury you couldn't afford? "She's tougher than she looks," Marcus interjected, his protective instincts kicking in. "We both are. Don't need any charity, if that's what you're thinking." Victoria's attention shifted to Marcus, and Emma saw something flicker across the older woman's face. Not irritation at his defensiveness, but what looked almost like approval. "I wasn't thinking about charity," Victoria said quietly. "I was thinking about breakfast. There's a cafe across the street that makes excellent coffee, and I suddenly realized I'm tired of eating alone." The invitation landed between them like a small earthquake. Emma felt Marcus tense beside her, his street-honed paranoia kicking into high gear. She understood his concern. In their world, unexpected kindness usually came with strings attached, and those strings had a way of becoming nooses if you weren't careful. But there was something in Victoria Sterling's eyes, a loneliness that expensive suits and chauffeur-driven cars couldn't quite mask, that made Emma want to say yes. The cafe Victoria had chosen was small, intimate, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in local artwork that had probably been painted by struggling artists not unlike Emma herself. It was the kind of place that existed in the spaces between the city's more aggressive commerce, surviving on loyalty rather than location, on atmosphere rather than advertising. Victoria had never been inside. In all her years of building an empire in Manhattan, she'd never once stepped foot in a place that didn't have reservations, dress codes, and menus without prices. Now, sitting across from Emma at a wobbly table near the window, she wondered what other worlds existed parallel to her own, invisible until you chose to see them. "I hope Marcus wasn't too offended," Victoria said, watching Emma wrap her hands around an oversized mug of coffee that was probably the first hot meal she'd had in days. "I invited him too, but he seemed to think I had ulterior motives." Emma managed a small smile. "Marcus has been looking out for people like me for years. He's seen what happens when kindness comes with conditions. She took a tentative sip, closing her eyes briefly at the warmth. Besides, I think he wanted to give us privacy to figure out what this is. And what do you think this is? The question was direct, businesslike, and Emma recognized it as the tone of someone accustomed to getting straight answers. She'd heard similar directness from professors, from job interviewers in her previous life, from her mother's doctors when they'd run out of comfortable euphemisms for terminal. I think, Emma said carefully, you're someone who's used to having a reason for everything you do. And I think sitting in a coffee shop with a homeless girl from the park doesn't fit into your usual reasons. Victoria's laugh was short, sharp, surprised. You're right, it doesn't. She leaned back in her chair, studying Emma with the same intensity she brought to potential business partners. I run Sterling Enterprises. Maybe you've heard of it? Emma nodded. Who hadn't? Sterling's name was on buildings throughout the city, their corporate logo as familiar as the Statue of Liberty. Real estate development, technology investments, hospitality. You're worth, what, $3 billion? 4.5 actually. But who's counting? Victoria's tone was dry, self-deprecating in a way that suggested she was tired of her own success story. Point is, I spend my days making decisions that affect thousands of people, managing investments worth more than most countries' GDP. Last night, a man proposed to me not because he loved me, but because he thought our combined portfolios would make beautiful children. Emma nearly choked on her coffee. He actually said that? Not in so many words. But that's what it was. That's what it always is. Victoria's fingers drummed against the table, a nervous habit she usually suppressed in business settings. Do you know how many marriage proposals I've received in the last 5 years? I'm guessing more than most people get in a lifetime. 17. 17 men who looked at my bank statements and saw their retirement plans. 17 conversations that felt like merger negotiations. Victoria's voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. I started saying no automatically. Didn't even listen to the whole pitch anymore. Just no. Always no. Emma set down her mug, studying Victoria with new understanding. That's why you stopped. In the park. You were looking for something that wasn't about your money. Maybe. Or maybe I was looking for someone who didn't know my money existed. Victoria met Emma's eyes across the small table. When was the last time someone asked you about your dreams instead of your assets? The question hit Emma harder than she'd expected. Dreams felt like luxury items now, like designer clothes or expensive restaurants. Beautiful to think about, but utterly impractical for someone in her situation. It's been a while, she admitted. Dreams don't keep you warm at night or put food in your stomach. I've been focused on more immediate concerns. But you had them once. I did. Emma's voice grew softer, touched with the kind of wistfulness that comes from remembering a person you used to be. I was studying literature at NYU. Had this crazy idea that I could teach, maybe write, help kids from backgrounds like mine see that education was a way out of poverty, not just a pretty theory for rich kids to debate. What happened? The question was gentle, but Emma could hear the genuine curiosity beneath it. Not the morbid fascination that some people had with others' misfortune, but real interest in her story, her journey, her humanity. My mother got sick. Cancer. The treatments. Insurance covered the basics, but the specialists, the experimental drugs, the round-the-clock care she needed. Emma's hands tightened around her mug. I dropped out, liquidated everything, maxed out credit cards, worked 3 jobs while trying to take care of her. It wasn't enough. She died anyway, and I lost everything trying to save her. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her business-trained mind automatically calculating the financial catastrophe Emma was describing. She'd seen similar scenarios in her real estate business. Families destroyed by medical debt, forced to sell homes, to declare bankruptcy, to disappear into the cracks of a system that promised health care, but delivered financial ruin. I'm sorry, Victoria said finally. That kind of loss. It's not just about money, is it? It's about watching everything you thought you knew about the world fall apart. Emma looked up, surprised by the understanding in Victoria's voice. Exactly. Everyone talks about the American dream like it's this guaranteed thing. Work hard, get educated, build a better life. But nobody tells you how fragile it all is. One medical emergency, one family crisis, one streak of bad luck, and everything you've built can disappear. And yet you're still here. Still here, Emma confirmed. Sleeping in parks, washing dishes when I can find work, trying to figure out what comes next. Some days I think about just giving up, going back to where I came from, admitting defeat. But you don't. But I don't. Emma managed a genuine smile for the first time since they'd sat down. Stubborn, I guess. My mother used to say I was too stubborn for my own good. Victoria found herself smiling in return. Mine used to say the same thing. Of course, in my case, stubborn built an empire. And in my case, stubborn keeps me believing that sleeping in parks is temporary. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two women from completely different worlds who had somehow found common ground in the space between wealth and poverty, between success and survival, between the people they'd been raised to be and the people they'd chosen to become. Emma, Victoria said finally, her voice carrying a weight that suggested an important decision being made. I have a proposition for you. Not charity, not pity. A job offer. Emma's breath caught. What kind of job? I need someone who understands what it means to fight for survival. Someone who can look at my business decisions and tell me how they'll affect real people, not just profit margins. Someone who won't be impressed by my bank account or intimidated by my reputation. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes intense with the kind of focus that had built her empire. I need someone who will tell me the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. You want to hire me to? What be your conscience? I want to hire you to be my advisor, my consultant on reality. Victoria's smile was sharp, determined. Think of it as a cultural exchange program. You teach me about the world below the 40th floor, and I'll teach you about building the kind of power that can actually change things. Emma stared at her, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. It sounded too good to be true, the kind of fairy tale that happened in movies but not in real life. And yet, there was something in Victoria's expression that suggested she was completely serious. Why? Emma asked. Why me? You could hire consultants with degrees, with experience, with credentials. Because, Victoria said quietly, you're the first person in years who looked at me and saw a human being instead of a bank account. Because you survived something that would have destroyed most people, and you did it without losing your ability to hope. Because when I asked if you were all right, you heard it as a genuine question, instead of an opening to ask me for money. The offer hung in the air between them, like a bridge spanning two different worlds. Emma could see her reflection in the cafe window, tired, worn, but still fighting. And beside it, she could see Victoria's reflection too. Polished, powerful, but somehow just as alone. What would I have to do? Emma asked. Help me remember what it means to be human, Victoria said simply. Help me build something that matters to more than just shareholders and board members. Help me figure out how to say yes to something real for the first time in my life. And in that moment, Emma realized that the wealthy woman sitting across from her might be just as lost as she was, just lost in a different kind of wilderness. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in the lobby of Sterling Tower, feeling like an alien who had somehow infiltrated the mother ship. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses, and everywhere she looked, she saw the uniform of success. Dark suits, expensive watches, briefcases that whispered wealth with every step. Her own transformation had been swift but disorienting. Victoria had insisted on providing her with appropriate business attire. A small apartment in Brooklyn. Temporary, Emma had insisted. Until I can afford my own. And most importantly, a crash course in corporate culture from Victoria's personal assistant, Sarah. The key, Sarah had explained during one of their intensive briefing sessions, is to remember that everyone in that building is performing a role, Ms. Sterling included. Your job is to help her figure out when the performance is helping and when it's hurting. Now, stepping into the private elevator that would take her to the 42nd floor, Emma wondered if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The woman who had invited her for coffee had been vulnerable, almost fragile beneath her polished exterior. The Victoria Sterling who ruled from the top of this tower might be an entirely different person. The elevator doors opened with a soft whisper, and Emma stepped into what looked like the bridge of a starship designed by someone with unlimited resources and intimidating taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city that had nearly swallowed her whole, while abstract art that probably cost more than her education decorated walls that seemed to stretch toward infinity. "Miss Rodriguez?" Sarah appeared at her elbow with the efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of anticipating needs. "Miss Sterling is in the conference room. She's having a challenging morning." Even through the thick oak doors, Emma could hear raised voices. Victoria's voice, crisp and commanding, cutting through what sounded like multiple male voices all trying to speak at once. Emma recognized the tone. It was the same one her literature professors had used when students tried to argue that they deserved grades they hadn't earned. "Should I come back later?" Emma asked. Sarah's smile was thin, diplomatic. "Actually, your timing might be perfect. She's meeting with the board about the Riverside project and, well, you'll see." The conference room was a temple to corporate power, a massive table that could seat 20, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than Emma's first car. 12 men in identical dark suits sat around that table like a jury delivering a verdict, and at the head sat Victoria, looking like a queen defending her throne. "The numbers don't lie." "Victoria," one of the men was saying. His voice carried the particular brand of condescension that Emma remembered from job interviews, where she'd been told she was overqualified for positions that were really just polite ways of saying she was too poor for their comfort. "The Riverside project is bleeding money. We need to cut our losses and sell to Blackstone Development. Blackstone wants to tear down those buildings and put up luxury condos," Victoria replied, her voice steady, but Emma could see the tension in her shoulders. "Those are people's homes, Harold. Families who have lived there for generations. Families who are 6 months behind on rent," another board member interjected. "Victoria, I understand your humanitarian concerns, but we have a responsibility to our shareholders." Emma had been briefed on the Riverside project during her orientation. Sterling Enterprises had purchased a cluster of aging apartment buildings on the Lower East Side with the intention of renovating them into affordable housing. It was exactly the kind of project that could have helped people like her, like Marcus, like the dozens of others she'd met during her months on the street. But renovation was expensive, and some of the families living there were struggling with rent even at below-market rates. "May I say something?" The words left Emma's mouth before she could stop them. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her with the collective weight of centuries of privilege and power. She felt like a mouse who had wandered into a convention of hawks. "Emma," Victoria said, and there was something like relief in her voice. "Gentlemen, this is Emma Rodriguez, our new special advisor on community impact. Emma, meet the board of directors." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Emma could practically see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? And why was she in their sanctuary of corporate decision-making? "With respect, Ms. Sterling," Harold said, his voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that was really a weapon. "We're discussing complex financial matters. Perhaps your advisor could wait outside while we finish?" Emma felt the familiar burn of dismissal, the same feeling she'd experienced in job interviews, at the financial aid office, in meetings with her mother's doctors, the assumption that her background, her appearance, her very existence, somehow disqualified her from having anything meaningful to contribute. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't asking for help or begging for consideration. This time, she was here because someone believed her perspective had value. "Actually," Emma said, stepping forward toward the table, "I think this is exactly the kind of situation where my experience might be useful." She looked around the room, meeting each board member's gaze in turn. "How many of you have ever been evicted?" The question landed like a small bomb in the pristine conference room. Several of the men shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, while others looked like they weren't sure they'd heard correctly. "I have," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "Twice. Once when I was 12 and my father lost his construction job. Once when I was 22 and my mother's medical bills ate through our savings. So when you talk about families being 6 months behind on rent, I don't see numbers on a spreadsheet. I see a kid doing homework by candlelight because the electricity's been shut off." I see a mother choosing between paying rent and buying groceries. I see people who aren't lazy or irresponsible. They're drowning. Ms. Rodriguez, one of the younger board members, interrupted. We understand that these situations are difficult, but business decisions can't be made based on emotion. Who said anything about emotion? Emma's interruption was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm talking about economics. Pure, hard economics. She turned to the whiteboard at the front of the room, grabbed a marker, and began writing numbers with the confidence of someone who had lived these calculations. Average cost of eviction proceedings in New York, $8,000 per unit. Average time to find new tenants in renovated low-income housing, 6 months. Lost revenue per unit during vacancy, $18,000. Cost of dealing with vandalism and property damage from abandoned buildings, approximately $50,000 per building per year. The room was dead silent now. All 12 board members staring at the numbers she was writing with the focus of people watching their stock portfolios crash in real time. Now, Emma continued, turning back to face them. Average cost of working with existing families to restructure payment plans, provide job placement assistance, and create rent-to-own opportunities, $12,000 per unit, one-time cost. Result: stable, invested tenants who maintain the property, pay consistent rent, and create the kind of community stability that increases long-term property values. She set down the marker and looked directly at Harold, the man who had tried to dismiss her. So tell me, which approach makes better business sense? Cutting losses or investing in solutions? Victoria was staring at her with something like amazement. In 3 weeks of briefings and strategy sessions, Emma had absorbed not just the details of Sterling's various projects, but the underlying philosophy of sustainable business practices. More importantly, she had connected that philosophy to lived experience in a way that made abstract concepts suddenly concrete. Those are interesting points, Harold admitted grudgingly. But you're assuming that these families can become stable tenants with support. What if they can't? What if we invest all that money and they still fail? Emma's smile was sharp, tired, and absolutely fearless. Then you'll have done everything you could to help them succeed, and you'll still own property in one of the most rapidly gentrifying areas of Manhattan. Either way, you win. The difference is whether you win by lifting people up or by stepping on them. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. This wasn't the silence of dismissal or condescension. This was the silence of 12 very successful men realizing that they had been outmaneuvered by someone they had written off before she opened her mouth. Motion to postpone the vote on Blackstone, Victoria said into that silence, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just watched her risky investment in an unconventional advisor pay its first dividend. I want detailed proposals for both approaches on my desk by Friday. As the board members filed out, some looking thoughtful, others looking like they'd been hit by trucks, Harold paused at Emma's chair. That was impressive, he said. And for the first time, his tone carried genuine respect instead of patronizing courtesy. Where did you learn to think like that? Emma looked up at him. This man who probably earned more in a month than she'd seen in her entire life, who had tried to dismiss her as irrelevant, who was now asking her advice. I learned it, she said quietly, by living it. After the room emptied, Victoria and Emma stood at the windows, looking out at the city spread below them like a circuit board of dreams and disasters. That was incredible, Victoria said. I've been fighting those battles for months, trying to convince them that doing right by people could also be profitable. You did it in 10 minutes, Emma shrugged, still feeling the adrenaline of the confrontation. I had an advantage. They see poverty as a theoretical problem. I see it as a math problem with human consequences. Makes it easier to find solutions when you understand both sides of the equation. Victoria turned to look at her, this woman who had been sleeping in parks a month ago and had just revolutionized a boardroom discussion with the kind of insight that MBA programs tried and failed to teach. Emma, she said quietly, I think this is the beginning of something important. Emma nodded, looking out at the city that had tried to break her and had instead forged her into someone who could stand in rooms like this and demand to be heard. I think you're right, she said. I think we're about to change some things. 6 months later, Emma stood in the same conference room where she had first challenged the Sterling board, but everything had changed. The Riverside project had become a model for affordable housing development, featured in urban planning journals and visited by delegations from cities around the world. More importantly, it had proven that doing the right thing and making money weren't mutually exclusive concepts. But the real transformation had happened in quieter moments, in conversations between two women who had somehow found their way across the impossible distance between their different worlds. Victoria arrived early that morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the small cafe where they'd shared their first real conversation. It had become a ritual, starting important days with coffee that tasted like possibilities rather than profit margins. "Nervous?" Emma asked, accepting her cup and noticing the slight tremor in Victoria's usually steady hands. "Terrified," Victoria admitted. "I've presented to heads of state, negotiated deals worth billions, faced down corporate raiders who would sell their mothers for market share. But this..." She gestured toward the folder on the conference table, thick with legal documents and architectural plans, financial projections and community impact studies. The Sterling Foundation, a $10 billion commitment to affordable housing, education initiatives, and small business development in underserved communities. "This feels bigger than anything I've ever done," Victoria continued, "because it's not just about building wealth anymore. It's about using wealth to build something that matters." Emma understood. Over the past months, she had watched Victoria shed layers of protective armor, revealing someone who had been hungry for meaning, for connection, for the kind of purpose that couldn't be measured in quarterly earnings reports. The woman who had once said no to every proposal had learned to say yes to possibilities she'd never imagined. "The board will support it," Emma said confidently. "Harold's become one of your biggest advocates since he realized that doing good is actually good business. And the community response has been overwhelming. It's not the board I'm worried about." Victoria's voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way that had become familiar, but never failed to surprise Emma. Success had taught Victoria to hide her uncertainties behind walls of competence and control. But somehow in Emma's presence, those walls had become permeable. "Then what?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Victoria walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the morning sky. "My mother called last night. She's flying in from the Hamptons for the foundation announcement. She wants to meet you." Emma's stomach dropped. Victoria's mother, Margaret Sterling, heir to old New York money, queen of charity galas that raised millions for causes she'd never personally witnessed. Emma had heard stories about Margaret's legendary disapproval of Victoria's unconventional business practices, her horror at the Riverside project, her pointed questions about Victoria's new influences. "She thinks you're a phase," Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some kind of midlife crisis wrapped up in social consciousness. She's convinced that once the novelty wears off, I'll go back to being the daughter she raised, focused on profit, married to someone with the right pedigree, producing grandchildren who will carry on the family tradition of accumulated wealth and social prominence. And what do you think?" Victoria turned from the window, and Emma saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. A certainty that ran deeper than business confidence, stronger than financial success. "I think," Victoria said slowly, "that I've spent my entire life saying no to the wrong things and yes to the wrong people. I think I built an empire, but I forgot to build a life. I think you showed me the difference between being powerful and being alive." The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that went far beyond professional collaboration or even friendship. They both felt it. The shift that had been happening gradually over months of working together, eating together, learning to see the world through each other's eyes. "Victoria," Emma started, but her words were interrupted by Sarah's voice over the intercom. "Ms. Sterling, your mother has arrived. She's brought someone with her." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Send them in, Sarah." The doors opened to reveal Margaret Sterling in all her formidable glory. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Emma's apartment rent, moving with the kind of regal bearing that came from generations of unquestioned privilege. Behind her walked a man Emma didn't recognize, tall and conventionally handsome in the way that expensive schools and exclusive clubs tended to produce. "Victoria, darling." Margaret's voice could have cut crystal. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the charts about affordable housing, the photographs of community gardens, the testimonials from families whose lives had been changed by the Foundation's work. Her expression suggested she was looking at evidence of a communicable disease. Mother. Victoria's professional mask slipped back into place with practiced ease. I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon. I wanted to arrive early. Give us time to discuss a few things before your announcement. Margaret's gaze finally landed on Emma, who had the distinct feeling of being evaluated like a stock option of questionable value. You must be the advisor I've heard so much about. Emma Rodriguez, Emma said, extending her hand. Margaret shook it with the kind of limp grip that suggested she was doing Emma a tremendous favor by acknowledging her existence. And this, Margaret continued, gesturing to her companion, is Charles Whitmore, Harvard Business School, family and banking, very interested in sustainable development projects. I thought you two should meet. Emma saw Victoria's shoulders tense almost imperceptibly. Charles stepped forward with the confident smile of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, extending his hand to Victoria with the practiced charm of someone closing a deal. Victoria, it's an honor. Your mother has told me so much about your work. Fascinating stuff, really. Profit with purpose. Very trendy right now. Trendy, Victoria repeated, her voice flat. Oh yes, all the major firms are getting into social impact investing. Great PR, excellent tax advantages, and if you structure it right, the returns can be quite impressive. Charles was warming to his topic, apparently oblivious to the way Victoria's expression was shifting from polite interest to barely concealed irritation. I've been thinking we could collaborate on some projects, pool our resources, maximize impact. Your foundation could benefit enormously from our firm's expertise in structuring philanthropic investments for optimal returns. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. She recognized the language, the approach, the assumption that everything, even generosity, was ultimately about profit optimization. It was the same mentality that had tried to turn the Riverside families into acceptable losses on a balance sheet. Optimal returns, Victoria said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that Emma had learned to recognize as a warning sign. Exactly. Your mother was just telling me about some of your recent experiments with low-income housing. Admirable, of course. But there are ways to achieve the same social impact with much better financial outcomes. It's all about finding the right balance between doing good and doing well. Margaret was watching this exchange with the satisfaction of someone who believed she was watching her plan unfold perfectly. Charles has some wonderful ideas about how to professionalize your foundation's approach, darling. Make it more sustainable, more impactful. More profitable, you mean? Emma said quietly. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and suddenly all eyes in the room were on her. Charles looked like he'd been interrupted by a piece of furniture that had suddenly started talking. Margaret's expression could have frozen fire. I beg your pardon? Charles said, his tone suggesting that Emma had committed some breach of etiquette by speaking without permission. I said more profitable, Emma repeated, her voice stronger now. That's what you're really talking about, isn't it? Taking Victoria's foundation and turning it into another investment vehicle with good PR? Now see here, Charles sputtered. I hardly think someone in your position is qualified to comment on complex financial structures. My position? Emma's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. You mean my position as someone who actually lived in the communities you want to optimize? Someone who knows the difference between helping people and helping yourself? Emma, Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. I think perhaps you're overstepping. No. Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a sword through silk. She's not overstepping. She's doing exactly what I pay her to do, telling the truth about what really matters. Victoria moved to stand beside Emma, and in that moment, the alignment was clear. Not just professional, not just personal, but something deeper, a shared understanding of what they were building together and what they were willing to fight to protect. Charles, Victoria continued, her voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. Thank you for your interest in our work. But the Sterling Foundation isn't looking for partners who see social impact as a marketing strategy. We're looking to change lives, not optimize tax deductions. Charles's confident smile faltered. Victoria, I think you're misunderstanding my intentions. I don't think I am. Victoria's gaze shifted to her mother, and Emma could see years of accumulated expectations and disappointments crystallizing into this single moment. Mother, I know you brought Charles here because you think I need guidance, that I've lost my way in some kind of idealistic phase. But I need you to understand something. Margaret's chin lifted in preparation for battle. Victoria, you're throwing away everything we've built, everything your father worked for. I'm building on everything Dad worked for, Victoria interrupted, her voice gentle but implacable. Dad didn't accumulate wealth for the sake of accumulation. He built something that would last, something that would matter. The foundation isn't a betrayal of his legacy. It's the fulfillment of it. By giving away billions to people who haven't earned it, by surrounding yourself with... Margaret's gaze flicked dismissively toward Emma. Advisors who fill your head with socialist nonsense? Emma felt the familiar sting of dismissal, the weight of being reduced to a category rather than seen as a person. But before she could respond, Victoria stepped forward, her voice carrying a heat that Emma had never heard before. Advisors who remind me what it means to be human, Victoria said fiercely. Emma didn't fill my head with anything, except the truth about what my decisions actually cost. She showed me that every choice I make affects real people with real lives, not just numbers on spreadsheets. She taught me that saying yes to the right things requires saying no to everything that doesn't matter. The silence that followed was deafening. Charles looked like he'd been slapped, Margaret like she'd witnessed a betrayal of cosmic proportions. Emma felt her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Victoria, Margaret said finally, her voice cold as Arctic wind. I hope you realize what you're choosing. This path you're on, it leads to isolation, to irrelevance. People in our circle don't understand these experiments. They're beginning to talk. Let them talk, Victoria said simply. I spent 40 years caring what people in our circle thought. It built me a very successful, very empty life. I'm not interested in their approval anymore. Margaret's composure cracked just slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine hurt beneath the aristocratic disapproval. And what about my approval? What about the family name, the reputation your father and I built? Victoria's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. I love you, Mother. I respect everything you and Dad accomplished, but I can't live my life trying to be the daughter you imagined instead of the woman I actually am. She turned to Charles, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding around him. Charles, I'm sure you're very good at what you do, but what we're building here isn't about finding new ways to make money from other people's suffering. It's about using money to stop suffering altogether. Victoria. Charles tried one more time, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Emma's skin crawl. You're being emotional about this. Business decisions shouldn't be made based on feelings. Who said anything about feelings? Emma interrupted, echoing her words from that first board meeting 6 months ago. We're talking about results, hard, measurable results. She walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and began writing with the confidence of someone who had spent months learning to translate lived experience into corporate language. Riverside Project, 100% occupancy, 15% increase in property values, 0 evictions, 6 new businesses opened by residents, 43 children improved academic performance due to stable housing. Total cost, $12 million. Total return on investment over 5 years, projected $38 million. She turned to face Charles, whose condescending smile had completely disappeared. Foundation Education Initiative. 200 students in our scholarship program. 96% high school graduation rate in participating schools. 68 students admitted to 4-year colleges. Cost per student, $8,000 annually. Average lifetime increase in earning potential per graduate, $1.2 million. Return on investment to the community, astronomical. The room was dead silent as Emma set down the marker. So tell me, Charles, what exactly about our approach needs optimizing? The part where we're making money, or the part where we're changing lives? Charles opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he managed. Those are impressive numbers. They're not numbers, Victoria said quietly. They're people. They're families who don't have to choose between rent and groceries anymore. They're kids who believe they can go to college. They're small business owners who got a chance to build something meaningful. She looked directly at her mother. They're the difference between accumulating wealth and creating legacy. Margaret was staring at her daughter with an expression that mixed frustration, confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Victoria, I want you to be happy, to be secure, to build something that will last. I am building something that will last, Mother. Something bigger than bank accounts or social status or family connections. Victoria's voice was gentle now, patient in the way of someone who had found their center and could afford to be kind to those still searching for theirs. I'm building a life that means something. She turned to Emma, and in her eyes was a question that had been building for months, a possibility that had been growing stronger with every shared coffee, every late-night strategy session, every moment when they had chosen to trust each other with truths that mattered. Emma, Victoria said, her voice carrying the weight of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump into something unknown and wonderful. 6 months ago, you asked me what this was. This thing between us, this partnership, this connection. Emma's breath caught. She could feel Margaret's disapproval radiating like heat from a furnace. Could see Charles looking like he was witnessing a car crash in slow motion. But all of that faded into background noise compared to the look in Victoria's eyes. I told you then that I'd spent my life saying no to every proposal, every possibility, every chance at something real. Victoria continued. I told you I was tired of merger negotiations disguised as relationships. Tired of people who saw my bank account instead of my heart. Victoria stepped closer, close enough that Emma could see the vulnerability behind the boardroom confidence, the hope behind the corporate authority. So I have a different kind of proposal for you, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to say. Not a business merger, not a strategic alliance, not a calculated decision based on optimal returns. She reached for Emma's hands, holding them like she was holding something precious and fragile and absolutely essential. I'm proposing a life together. I'm proposing that we stop pretending this is just about work. Stop hiding behind professional boundaries. Stop acting like what we've built is anything less than love. The word hung in the air like a bridge spanning the distance between their different worlds. Between wealth and poverty, between power and authenticity, between the people they had been and the people they were choosing to become together. I'm proposing, Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, that we say yes to something real. Something that can't be measured in quarterly reports or optimized for tax advantages. Something that matters more than money, more than reputation, more than anything I thought I wanted before I met you. Emma felt tears she hadn't known were building spill over onto her cheeks. 6 months ago, she had been sleeping in parks, believing that love was a luxury she couldn't afford, that connections across class lines were fairy tales that happened to other people in different kinds of stories. Victoria, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, are you asking me what I think you're asking me? Victoria's smile was radiant, transformative, the kind of smile that made Emma understand why people wrote poems about love and fought wars over beauty and built empires just to have something worthy to offer the person who had stolen their heart. I'm asking you to marry me, Victoria said simply. I'm asking you to build something with me that's bigger than either of our individual lives. I'm asking you to be my partner in everything, in business, in life, in changing the world one impossible project at a time. The silence that followed was electric, charged with possibility and terror and joy so profound, it felt like standing in sunlight after months of winter. Yes, Emma said, her voice barely audible but absolutely certain. Yes to all of it. Yes to you, yes to us, yes to whatever we can build together. Victoria's answering smile could have powered the city for a week. She pulled Emma into her arms, and in that moment, the conference room with its corporate trappings and family drama faded away, leaving only two women who had found their way across impossible distances to arrive at something that felt like home. Behind them, Margaret Sterling stood frozen in shock, watching her carefully ordered world rearrange itself around realities she had never imagined. Charles looked like he was witnessing the end of civilization as he knew it. But Emma and Victoria were no longer paying attention to their audience. They were too busy saying yes to forever. As we reach the end of this incredible journey, we've witnessed something truly extraordinary. The story of two women who refused to let society's expectations define their happiness. Victoria Sterling, who built an empire but nearly lost her soul, and Emma Rodriguez, who lost everything but never lost hope, found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. Their love story reminds us that the most powerful connections often happen when we least expect them, between people who seem to have nothing in common except their hunger for something real. They showed us that true partnership isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life. It's about finding someone worth building a completely new life with. Victoria learned that saying yes to love meant saying no to everything that had kept her isolated behind walls of wealth and expectation. Emma discovered that her experiences of struggle and survival weren't burdens to overcome, but strengths that could change the world when wielded with purpose and love. Together, they proved that love doesn't recognize boundaries of class or background, that authentic connection transcends social barriers, and that the most beautiful thing you can build with your life is a partnership that makes both people better than they ever imagined they could be alone. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in the power of unexpected love and authentic connection, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear that love can find us anywhere, even sleeping in squares or sitting behind mahogany desks. And let me know in the comments, what unexpected connection has changed your life? Thank you for joining me on this journey of love, hope, and the courage to say yes when your heart recognizes home.